Hey guys, so I'm going to go over your inquiry project. If you have not noticed, I'm going to show you two ways you can find it. The first way is from our Canvas homepage. If you click on this assignment sheets icon right here, it's going to take you to a major assignment sheets list, and it has your inquiry project, your writing theory, and your portfolio. Obviously, the writing theory and the portfolio are not up yet, but what you have first is a link to your inquiry project, and it's a module of assignment sheets that includes a project overview, an annotated bibliography, and a digital essay. So I'm going to go to the project overview first because it's sort of the home page or the landing page. And the project is two parts. There's a couple of different places on this assignment sheet where you can click on the two parts, the annotated bibliography and the digital essay. Right now we're in Unit 1, and that's when you are deciding what your topic is going to be, what your question is going to be, what you're going to be trying to figure out. And once you pick that topic in this unit, we'll go into Unit 2 when we'll be assembling the annotated bibliography, and then we'll go into Unit 3 when we'll be working on the essay. And again, if you remember, I'm going to go back to reference the model that we went over earlier using the conversation for violent video games and teens. We drew that model we looked at that model in a presentation based off of the Burke's Parlor metaphor. And the middle, in the center of the model, was the topic. That's what the conversation is about. Around the outside, I brainstormed and showed you some of the possible voices or groups of people that would have stakes in this conversation that would be sort of in the parlor or at the table as part of this conversation. So in Unit 1, we're deciding what's in that center, what the conversation is going to be about. When we're compiling the annotated bibliography, we're going to be compiling a list of sources that create sort of a well-rounded picture of the conversation. We're not going to be trying to find evidence. We talked about there's lots of different ways you can use sources. We're going to be trying to find mostly primary and secondary sources. Trying to find news, scholarly voices, studies, interviews, documentaries, a range of different texts that represent different voices in this conversation. So you're not going to be trying to come at it by proving a point. You're going to be trying to come at it by somebody who is learning and hearing everybody out of this conversation. Remember, we read the good, the bad, and the ugly, because even if you disagree with it, you can't refute what you don't read. So we're going to be trying to get at a little bit of everything with the annotated bibliography. And then when you actually take a seat in that conversation, that's when we get to the digital essay, and that's when you're going to be trying to create a very visual, designed essay that is going to be your attempt to contribute something new, contribute something to this conversation. So I'm going to go through, if you read through this assignment sheet, you'll see there's kind of an overview first. And then, when do I need to know what my topic will be? Well, we're working on that now. We are working on our Studio 2, and after Studio 2, we'll do kind of a last call, and directions for Studio 2 are in a different video. So once we decide what your topic is going to be, and what your inquiry question is going to be, what it is you're trying to figure out about this issue, that's when we'll move into the annotated bibliography. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the annotated bibliography. We're not there yet. We'll go over it again in more detail, but I'm just sort of giving you an overview because sometimes it's a little easier to pinpoint and to kind of think ahead if you sort of have an idea of what's coming. So this, again, is your chance. And I'm going to kind of just scroll down and show you some of the things that are going to be on this assignment sheet when we get to it, right? Your annotated bibliography is going to be something that you're going to compose in your Google Doc. If you've never seen an annotated bibliography, it looks just like kind of a works cited section or a references section that you might put at the end of a research paper, like a list of those bibliographic citations, except underneath each bibliographic citation is a paragraph of commentary. That's the annotated part. Like, if you've ever, I know probably in high school, you had to read a novel for your teacher and they asked you to like annotate in the margins because you were making your own notes and commentary. That's it. You are, as a researcher, compiling these resources and you're leaving commentary, bibliographic citations so people can access it, and commentary on each source so that people who use this tool, they will be able to have some quick information about what the source is about, who the author is, what it kind of contributes to the conversation, so they would know if they want to access it. Annotated bibliographies are sort of pretty standard and very common academic text, and they are tertiary sources because, again, like tertiary sources compile data. And that's what you're doing. You're compiling data for other researchers. And this is something that academics often do for each other. They do the legwork by getting all these sources together, writing what they're all about, maybe like categorizing them into, sections so that people can find what they, want to use, what they want to look up and do some research on. And then you can look at this person's annotated bibliography and find quick access to sources. It's a tool or a resource that you provide for someone else. In terms of class, it also helps like track and evaluate the research that you're doing. So it serves that purpose for class too. So you're learning how to write this academic text and also kind of using it as a research tool as well for yourself. So each source for each thing you're going to write a summary and some notes about the credibility, about the author and publisher, their credentials, publications, potential bias. For instance, if it's like the New York Times, you might note who the author is and if they have publications or expertise, but you might also note that the publication tends to lean politically left as well. So here's what it looks like. You have the bibliographic citation, and then you have some examples of how the annotation might sound. And I pulled a couple of these from a previous student's work so you can kind of get an example of how they look, how they sound, what the summary and the notes about credibility kind of look like. And the next section is what will my annotated bibliography include? So it'll kind of break down like what kinds of sources you'll need, what the sections are going to be. I said sometimes the annotated bibliographies aren't just a straight list of sources. They're kind of categorized so people can kind of arrange them. And I've come up with a couple of categories just to help kind of ensure that you are getting at some different things, some current conversation, different perspectives, some things about like current events would go in this section, some like background. This is where like maybe older studies or important like past events or like terminology, things like that might go. Scholarly voices for our scholarly articles, which we'll be getting later. And then I have a wildcard option that I'll talk about later in more depth when we get to like the annotated bibliography kind of as a whole. What kinds of sources you'll be using, what kinds of sources you should not be including. I have the link here that kind of goes back to the information about content farms because we really want to stay away from anything. We're using tertiary sources to get our research off the ground, but we really kind of want to stay away from those when we get to the annotated bibliography because, again, we're, as researchers, working backwards. So you start with the tertiary sources, but then we're going to get into the secondary and the primary sources in the annotated bibliography. So we really want to stay away from like just definitions, like encyclopedias, like fact lists, about pages, like general overviews, things like that. And then there's a rubric that explains how it will be assessed. And you have this on the digital essay as well. And minimum requirements are half. Like you have like the number of sources you're supposed to have. You have the types of sources you're supposed to have. You wrote something, wrote an annotation for each of your sources. And then these are the skills we're working on, effective paraphrasing. And these also, these are categories that represent our 5 key concepts, our writerly skills. That strong first sentence that we're going to cover, like clear summary details, arrangement and presentation of sources, appropriate author info, addresses potential bias and relevance, diverse and appropriate sources. And you have a total of 100 points for that. Each one of those is, just like 5 or 10 points a piece. And then for the digital essay and for this, I have a built-in bonus for overall impression and evidence of effort and revision choices. So that way it gives me a little bit of wiggle room to give you a bump for evidence of effort, meaning, it kind of can help out if you maybe had a lower score in some of these areas, but I have evidence that you worked really hard on this assignment. It gives me a little bit of wiggle room to give you some extra points. And I cannot take your word for whether or not you worked really hard or spent a lot of time on it. I can only go by having a track record, like a record of emails, conferences, workshops, revisions, things that actually create a footprint that I can go back to and look at and see that you did, in fact, work really hard on this assignment. And I'm going to go back to, actually I'm going to go forward to the digital essay. Same thing, I'm just going to give a quick overview. This is a very visual type of writing that really sort of mimics the kind of writing that we see every day, because a lot of the writing that we see every day is online, and it's on the news, and it's social, and it's a very visual and interconnected to other sources, and uses video and images and uses a lot of things aside from just text. And that's sort of what we're talking about with multimodality as well, looking at the other layers and the other things that support our words, not just the text itself. And that's sort of what the digital essay is. So it kind of goes through some of the details about that, and how we're going to design the essay using affordances, which we've talked about already, digital design elements, which we'll get into, and digital tools like images, videos, infographics, hyperlinks. We'll get into some of the length requirements. It's at least 2,000 words. We'll have, again, like some requirements for numbers of like sections, how you're going to break the essay down. Research requirements, we're going to use at least 10 sources, again, for different purposes, not just evidence. We're going to try to have sources that illustrate. We're going to have sources that are there as evidence, some that are there to provide background information. So we're going to practice using sources in some different ways. We will kind of talk about citations and obviously like some things that we're going to be working on specifically. You'll also find these kinds of things popping up in your rubric. Hint, hint, wink, wink, for this assignment sheet. I've included some examples. I am going to add a few as we get a little bit closer from student work from the spring and possibly from last fall as well. And each one, it just kind of gives you a note about like what to pay attention to with that particular example. And again, a rubric that works kind of the same way as the as the annotated bibliography. And that, I'm going to go back to the inquiry project page. That is everything. And before I check out on this one, I'm going to show you the other place you can go to find your inquiry project. So I did say you could come in through assignment sheets. You can also come in through the modules section, and I have set it at the top. So it has the overview page and then the two parts of the assignment. Sorry, this does look a little bit different because this is my teacher view and not your student view, but it still should be at the top, and you should be able to see this kind of module here set above your weekly schedule. And that is all for your inquiry project for now. Peace.